A poor girl returned a billionaire's wallet. Instead of a reward, she was framed for kidnapping his daughter. Trapped in a burning warehouse, she used her own body to shield the child from the flames. The billionaire was ready to destroy her until a secret GPS recording exposed a terrifying truth. Stay with us to the very end as we uncover how this unforgettable story begins.
The rain in New York didn't just fall. It felt like a physical assault. Adela huddled under the cracked awning of a closed bookstore, her thin sweater soaked to the bone. She was 22, orphaned, and currently possessed exactly $4 and a silver locket that held the only photos of the parents she had lost to a tragic fire 3 years ago. The city was a concrete monster that didn't care if she lived or died. She had come here with dreams of a fresh start, but all she found was cold pavement and the bitter taste of hunger. As the wind whipped through the alley, a flash of black leather caught her eye near the gutter. She stepped forward, her worn-out sneakers squelching in the puddles. It was a wallet. Not just any wallet. A bespoke alligator skin bifold that screamed old money. Her breath hitched as she opened it. Inside sat a thick stack of $100 bills, at least $5,000 in cash, and a collection of titanium credit cards. But it wasn't the money that stopped her heart. It was a small, tucked-away photograph of a beautiful woman with a haunting smile and a business card that read, Lucas Vance, CEO of Vance International. For a moment, the devil whispered in her ear. That cash could buy her a warm bed, a month's worth of food, and a ticket out of this misery. No one would know. But then, she looked at the woman in the photo. There was a kindness in those eyes that reminded Adela of her mother. She couldn't do it. She couldn't build her life on someone else's loss. With trembling hands, she looked at the address on the ID card. The Vance estate. It was miles away, up in the hills where the air smelled like pine and privilege. Adela walked for 3 hours. Her feet bled and her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. When she finally reached the towering iron gates of the Vance mansion, she looked like a ghost haunting the gates of heaven. The security guard sneered at her, but when she held up the wallet, his face went pale. Minutes later, she was being led through a hallway of cold marble and silent shadows. The house was magnificent, yet it felt like a mausoleum. There was no music, no laughter, only the oppressive weight of grief that seemed to seep from the walls. She was ushered into a vast library. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window was a man whose silhouette radiated a terrifying power. Lucas Vance. He was younger than she expected, but his eyes were ancient, filled with a cold, jagged sorrow. He didn't turn around when she entered. "How much do you want?" he asked, his voice like grinding stones. "I know your type. You found it, you brought it back, and now you want a reward. Name your price and leave." Adela stood her ground, despite her knees shaking. "I don't want your money, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice small but steady. "I saw the photo inside. I thought someone might be missing it." She placed the wallet on his mahogany desk and turned to leave. Lucas finally turned, his gaze sharp enough to draw blood. He looked at the girl, soaked, shivering, yet carrying herself with a dignity that a billionaire's wealth couldn't buy. He looked at the wallet, untouched, and then back at her. For the first time in 2 years, something other than anger flickered in his chest. Curiosity. Before he could speak, a soft thud came from the doorway. A small girl, no more than 5 years old, stood there. Her name was Mia. She was dressed in a gray nightgown, her eyes wide and vacant, staring at nothing. Lucas's expression softened into a mask of pure agony. Since the accident that took his wife, Mia hadn't spoken a word. She was a prisoner in her own mind, trapped in a silent world of trauma. The doctors called it selective mutism. Lucas called it a living nightmare. Mia began to tremble, a silent panic attack taking hold. Lucas moved toward her, but she shrank away, retreating into the shadows. That was when Adela did something she couldn't explain. She didn't approach the girl. Instead, she sat down on the cold floor, right where she was, and began to hum. It was a low, melodic tune her mother used to sing to her when she was scared. It was the sound of safety. The silence in the room stretched, agonizingly thin. Then, the impossible happened. Mia stopped trembling. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Adela. For the first time in 2 years, the girl took a step toward someone, then another. She reached out and touched Adela's damp sleeve. Lucas stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. He had spent millions on therapists, and yet this stranger, this girl from the streets, had done more in 60 seconds than they had in 2 years. Lucas looked at Adela, his eyes narrowing as he made a split-second decision. He saw a girl with nothing to lose and everything to give. "You," he gestured to her. "What's your name?" "Adela, sir." He nodded slowly. "Adela, my house is a tomb and my daughter is fading away. You don't want my money? Fine. But you will earn your keep. My head housekeeper left this morning. The position is yours. You will stay here. You will care for this house, and you will stay near my daughter. Do we have an agreement?" Adela looked at the small hand gripping her sleeve, and then up at the broken man before her. She nodded. "Yes, sir." She didn't know it yet, but she had just walked into a den of lions, and the true danger was only just beginning. For the first 2 years after his wife's death, the Vance estate smelled of lemon bleach and suffocating silence. It was a fortress of grief. But within a month of Adela's arrival, the atmosphere began to shift. The heavy, velvet curtains that had kept the mansion in perpetual twilight were finally drawn back, allowing golden sunlight to spill across the cold marble floors. The sterile scent of cleaning supplies was replaced by the warm, inviting aroma of cinnamon, roasted apples, and freshly baked bread. Adela didn't just clean the house, she breathed life back into its dead lungs. Lucas Vance, a man whose heart was heavily guarded by logic and multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, found himself losing focus. Sitting in his mahogany-paneled study, he would often pause his international conference calls just to listen. He could hear Adela's soft humming from the kitchen, the clinking of porcelain plates, and most miraculously, the quiet, hesitant giggles of his daughter, Mia. One afternoon, he stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching Adela sit on the floor with Mia, patiently teaching her how to braid a doll's hair. There was a profound, effortless grace to her patience. Lucas felt a strange, terrifying warmth bloom in his chest, a feeling he had sworn to bury forever. But light always attracts predators. Enter Adana, a socialite with razor-sharp cheekbones and a heart as cold as dry ice. Adana had been circling the grieving billionaire like a vulture for 2 years. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday, her Louboutin heels clicking aggressively against the marble. She wore designer clothes and a suffocating cloud of expensive perfume. When she saw Adela, wearing a simple cotton apron, her hair tied up in a messy bun, holding Mia's hand, Adana's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. She saw exactly what Lucas saw, a replacement, and Adana absolutely despised being replaced. "You must be the new help," Adana drawled, looking Adela up and down as if she were inspecting a piece of dirt on her shoe. "Make yourself useful and fetch me an espresso. And do try to keep the child out of my way. Her blank stares give me a migraine." Adela felt a spike of anger, not for herself, but for the little girl who shrank back at Adana's harsh tone. Adela didn't flinch. She stepped slightly in front of Mia, a protective shield. "I'll get your coffee, Ms. Adana." But Mia plays where she likes. This is her home. The quiet defiance in Adela's voice made Adana's jaw clench. The war was silently declared. The climax of this silent war erupted 3 days later. The afternoon sun was blaring down on the estate's massive infinity pool. Lucas was in his home office, intensely finalizing a corporate merger. Adela was inside the kitchen, washing strawberries for Mia's snack. Mia was sitting near the edge of the patio, holding her favorite stuffed bunny, gazing at the sparkling water. She was terrified of the water, a trauma linked to the night of the accident, so she never went too close. Adana, sipping a martini under a shaded cabana, watched the child with malicious intent. If she could prove the new maid was negligent, Lucas would throw Adela out immediately. Adana walked over, feigning a sweet smile. "Oh, what a cute bunny," she cooed, snatching the toy from Mia's small hands. Mia reached for it, her eyes widening in silent distress. "Oops," Adana whispered coldly. With a flick of her manicured wrist, she tossed the stuffed bunny straight into the deep end of the pool. It bobbed on the surface, drifting further away. "Go get it, little mute," Adana hissed before turning her back. Driven by pure panic over losing her only comfort, Mia stumbled forward. Her small foot slipped on the wet tiles. With a terrifyingly silent splash, the 5-year-old tumbled into the 9-foot deep water. Through the open kitchen window, Adela heard the splash. It wasn't the sound of a playful dive. It was the chaotic thrashing of someone fighting for their life. Adela dropped the bowl of strawberries. The porcelain shattered across the floor, echoing like a gunshot. She sprinted out to the patio. When she saw the small ripples in Mia's gray dress sinking below the surface, her blood ran cold. Adela had a paralyzing phobia of deep water. She didn't know how to swim. But as she watched the little girl she had come to love sinking into the abyss, logic vanished. Maternal instinct roared to life. Adela didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the deep end. The water was freezing, shocking the air from her lungs. Panic clawed at her throat as she sank, swallowing mouthfuls of chlorinated water. She flailed wildly, her eyes burning as she searched the blue distortion. There, she grabbed Mia's tiny arm, pulling the heavy, struggling child against her chest. Adela kicked frantically, pushing Mia up toward the surface, sacrificing her own breath to keep the girl's head above water. But Adela was losing strength. The water was dragging her down. Her vision began to blur. She was drowning to save the child, and in her fading consciousness, her only thought was a desperate prayer that Mia would survive. Inside the study, Lucas saw a flash of movement through the glass doors. He dropped his phone mid-sentence. The $1 million deal instantly erased from his mind. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. He burst onto the patio just as Adela's head slipped under the water, leaving only Mia's terrified face gasping for air. Lucas dove into the pool, his expensive suit dragging heavily against him. He was a powerful swimmer. Within seconds, he reached them. He grabbed Adela by the waist with one arm and secured Mia with the other, kicking fiercely until he hauled both of them out onto the hard, sun-baked tiles. Coughing up water, Adela collapsed on the ground, shivering uncontrollably. Mia was crying. Loud, audible sobs that broke her 2-year silence. Lucas was kneeling beside them, his chest heaving, his expensive clothes ruined. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked at Adela, his voice a mix of furious terror and overwhelming relief. "Are you insane?" he roared, his hands gripping her shoulders. "You don't know how to swim. Why did you jump in?" Adela looked up at him, her lips blue, coughing as she pulled Mia into her arms. "I couldn't let her sink," she whispered, tears mixing with the pool water on her face. "I couldn't lose her." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. I couldn't lose her. In that raw, breathless moment, as he stared at the poor, orphaned girl who had just risked her life for a child that wasn't hers. The walls around Lucas's heart completely shattered. He didn't yell anymore. With a trembling breath, he wrapped his strong arms around both Adela and Mia, pulling them tightly against his chest. He buried his face in Adela's wet hair, holding onto her as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. Standing in the shadows of the cabana, Adela watched the billionaire embrace the maid. Her manicured nails dug into her palms until they bled. The seed of murder was officially planted. 2 years ago, on a rain-slicked highway overlooking the treacherous cliffs of Malibu, a luxury SUV twisted into a mangled wreck of burning metal. Standing a safe distance away, hidden in the shadows of the cypress trees, was Adela. She watched the flames lick the night sky, the reflection of the fire dancing in her cold, emotionless eyes. Her lips curled into a triumphant, chilling smile. She had paid a corrupt mechanic $500,000 to sever the brake lines. Lucas Vance's wife was inside that inferno. For Adela, it was a simple, brutal equation. Eliminate the wife, comfort the grieving billionaire, and slide a diamond ring onto her own finger to claim the Vance empire. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor. The paramedics arrived, pulling a tiny, bloodied but breathing body from the wreckage. Mia, the child, had survived the crash. For 2 agonizing years, that silent, traumatized little girl had been the only barrier between Adela and the ultimate prize. Adela had tried to play the role of the loving aunt, but Mia's terrifyingly blank stares always felt like the child knew exactly what Adela had done. And now, as if Mia's survival wasn't enough of a curse, the universe had sent a penniless maid to ruin everything. Back in the present, standing in her sprawling penthouse that overlooked the glittering city skyline, Adela hurled a crystal whiskey glass at the wall. It shattered into 100 jagged pieces, much like her patients. Her private investigator had just sent her the photos from the estate's pool incident. The images burned her retinas like acid. Lucas, the untouchable, ruthless CEO who had barely looked at Adela in 2 years, was fiercely embracing a pathetic, wet street rat. He was holding Adela like she was the most precious thing in the world. The look in his eyes wasn't just gratitude. It was possession. It was love. Adela gripped the marble countertop, her meticulously manicured nails digging in until her knuckles turned white. "No," she hissed, her voice vibrating with demonic rage. "I killed once for this empire. I dragged myself through hell to get to him. I will not let a charity case steal my throne." She walked over to her wall safe, her movements sharp and calculated. She pulled out an untraceable burner phone. She dialed a number that didn't exist in any public registry. It belonged to Viper, a ghost in the criminal underworld who specialized in making wealthy people's problems disappear permanently. "I have a new contract," Adela said, her voice entirely devoid of human empathy. "A woman and a child. I want it done clean, but I want the narrative to be dirty." Viper's gravelly voice asked for the details. Adela outlined her masterpiece of malice. It was brilliantly wicked. They wouldn't just kill Adela. They would completely obliterate her reputation. Viper's men would hack into Adela's meager bank account, depositing $2 million from a dummy offshore corporation. Then, using a cloned version of Adela's SIM card, they would send a ransom text to Lucas. The story would be flawless. The greedy, desperate orphan infiltrated the mansion, gained their trust, and kidnapped the traumatized daughter for ransom. When things went wrong, she killed the child and herself in a fiery explosion to hide the evidence. Lucas would be left with nothing but ashes and the bitter taste of betrayal. He would hate Adela forever. And Adela would be right there, waiting with open arms to comfort the broken billionaire. It was the perfect crime. Contrast this darkness with the innocent warmth inside the Vance mansion. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. The soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated Mia's room. Adela was gently tucking the little girl in, reading a story about a brave princess who wasn't afraid of dragons. Mia's small fingers were wrapped tightly around Adela's hand, refusing to let go. Standing in the doorway, half hidden in the shadows, was Lucas. The harsh, unforgiving lines of his face had softened, replaced by a profound, breathtaking peace. He looked at Adela not as a housekeeper, but as the heartbeat of his home. When Adela finished the story and tiptoed out of the room, she almost bumped into his solid chest. She gasped, looking up into his intense, dark eyes. The air between them suddenly felt electric, heavy with a tension that made Adela's breath hitch. Lucas reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was like fire against her skin. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. "For bringing the light back to my life. I don't know what I would do if I ever lost you." But that precious light was about to be violently extinguished. The next morning, Lucas kissed his daughter on the forehead and left in his armored car for a critical, high-stakes board meeting downtown. He promised to be back by dinner. It was the perfect window of opportunity. Just as the mansion settled into its quiet afternoon routine, Adela's phone buzzed aggressively. It was an emergency text from the local trauma center. Lucas Vance involved in a critical car accident. Severe hemorrhaging. He is calling for you and his daughter. Come immediately to the basement parking entrance for privacy. Adela's heart stopped. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her pale as a ghost. Panic, blinding, absolute, and overwhelming, hijacked her senses. She didn't think to call his head of security. She didn't think to verify the caller ID. Logic evaporated. She only thought of Lucas, the man she was secretly falling in love with. Bleeding, dying, calling out her name. "Mia, sweetie, we have to go right now. Daddy needs us," Adela choked out, tears already blurring her vision. She grabbed her coat, scooped the confused child into her arms, and bolted out the back door. Bypassing the main security checkpoint, she headed straight for the estate's service gate, where a black SUV with tinted windows was mysteriously idling. From the shadows of the tree line, sitting in her own car, Adana watched through a pair of designer binoculars. A sinister, twisted smile crept across her perfect lips. "Run, little mouse," Adana whispered to the wind, her eyes gleaming with malice. Run straight into the trap. The jaws of the trap were snapping shut, and the countdown to absolute destruction had officially begun. Rain lashed against the windshield of the black SUV as Adela practically threw herself and Mia into the back seat. "Take us to Memorial Hospital, please. Hurry," she pleaded, her voice cracking with pure terror. The driver, a hulking man wearing a dark leather jacket and a surgical mask, didn't say a word. He just shifted the gear, and the tires squealed against the wet pavement. Click. The heavy, metallic sound of the child safety locks engaging echoed in the confined space. Adela clutched Mia tighter to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stroked the little girl's hair, whispering prayers for Lucas's survival, completely oblivious to the fact that Lucas was perfectly fine, and she was the one driving straight into hell. 10 minutes into the ride, Adela looked out the tinted window. The towering glass skyscrapers of downtown were fading away, replaced by the decaying graffiti-covered walls of the abandoned industrial district. The streetlights flickered, casting long, menacing shadows. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her veins. "Wait, this is the wrong way. The hospital is back there. Stop the car," she yelled, pulling frantically at the door handle. It was deadlocked. The driver didn't slow down. Instead, a second man, who had been hiding flat in the front passenger seat, suddenly sat up. He turned around, holding a thick rag drenched in a sweet, sickly-smelling chemical. "No, get away from us!" Adela screamed, thrashing wildly. She twisted her body to shield Mia completely, taking the brunt of the attacker's force. The man pinned her back against the leather seat and clamped the soaked rag over her nose and mouth. Adela fought with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. She scratched, she kicked, she bit down on his fingers, drawing blood. But the chloroform was too strong. The dark interior of the car began to spin. Her limbs turned to lead. As her vision tunneled into darkness, her last conscious image was Mia's tear-filled eyes, and her last thought was a silent, desperate scream. "Lucas, help us." Meanwhile, miles away in a high-tech, glass-walled boardroom, Lucas Vance was dominating a brutal corporate takeover. He was in his element, sharp, calculating, and ruthless. But suddenly, a strange, suffocating pressure seized his chest. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. His intuition, honed by years of surviving the cutthroat business world, was screaming like a siren. He stopped mid-sentence. The room of billionaire investors fell dead silent. Lucas pulled out his private phone. There was a text message from Adela's number, but the words on the screen made his blood freeze in his veins. The text read, "I have Mia. $2 million has already been wired to my offshore account. Don't bother looking for us. She was just my meal ticket, and you were just a foolish, grieving mark. If you call the cops, the brat dies." Lucas stared at the glowing screen. For 3 agonizing seconds, the image of Adela, her sweet smile, the way she gently braided Mia's hair, the way she nearly drowned to save her, clashed violently with the words on the screen. The men in the room expected the billionaire to break down. They expected grief. Instead, Lucas Vance stood up, his chair crashing to the floor. His eyes were completely black, devoid of humanity. He wasn't a grieving father. He was the apex predator, and someone had just stolen his family. "No," Lucas growled, his voice a lethal, vibrating bass that made the executives shudder. "She didn't write this. Someone has them." He bypassed his security chief and opened a hidden application on his phone. Ever since the car crash 2 years ago, his paranoia had led him to implant a micro GPS tracker inside the small, silver locket Mia never took off. A blinking red dot appeared on the map, stationary in the abandoned shipyards. Lucas didn't call the police. He called his private tactical extraction team. "Lock down the city," he barked into the phone, walking out of the boardroom. "I want a perimeter around the docks. Shoot anyone who tries to leave." Back in the nightmare, Adela slowly regained consciousness. The air was frigid and damp. She was lying on a rough, cracked concrete floor. Her head throbbed with a sickening rhythm. She blinked against the dim, blue light, filtering through a broken skylight. Then she felt it. A small, trembling body pressed tightly against her side. "Mia," Adela rasped, wrapping her arms around the child. Mia was crying silently, her small fingers clutching Adela's ruined coat. But it wasn't the cold that made Adela's stomach drop. It was the smell. Pungent, chemical, toxic. It was the overwhelming stench of gasoline. Click, clack, click, clack. The sharp, unmistakable sound of stiletto heels echoed through the cavernous warehouse. From the shadows, a figure emerged, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Adela. She was wearing a blood-red designer trench coat, looking impeccably styled for a murder. In one hand, she held Adela's cell phone. In the other, a silver Zippo lighter. "Sleeping Beauty awakens," Adela mocked, her lips curling into a psychotic smile. "I must admit, you held out longer against the chloroform than I expected. You poor people really are bred like cockroaches." Adela pulled Mia completely behind her back, her maternal instinct overpowering her terror. "Adela, what is this? Why are you doing this?" "Lucas will find out." Adela threw her head back and laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Lucas? Oh, sweet, stupid Adela. Lucas currently hates your guts. You see, an hour ago, $2 million appeared in your bank account. And from your phone, I just sent him a text confessing that you kidnapped his precious, defective child for ransom." Adela stepped closer, the smell of her expensive perfume mixing sickeningly with the gasoline. "You're going to die a gold digger, and I am going to be the grieving fiancé who pieces his broken heart back together." The absolute malice of the plan hit Adela like a freight train. She wasn't just going to be murdered. Everything pure between her and Lucas was going to be destroyed. "You're insane," Adela whispered, her voice trembling. "Kill me if you want, but let Mia go. She's just a little girl. She hasn't done anything to you." Adana's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated evil. She leaned down, her face inches from Adela's. "Let her go? Why would I do that? I paid $500,000 to cut the brakes on her mother's car 2 years ago. The fact that this brat survived was a glitch. I am simply fixing the glitch." Adela's breath stopped. The horror was paralyzing. The woman standing before her wasn't just a jealous socialite. She was a murderer. A monster who had killed Lucas's wife. Adela flicked her thumb against the Zippo. Click. A bright, orange flame danced to life, illuminating the gasoline-soaked concrete around them. "Goodbye, Adela. It's a pity you won't be around to see my wedding," Adela whispered, tilting her wrist, preparing to drop the flame into the lethal puddle. Adela didn't beg anymore. She turned, throwing her entire body over Mia, curling into a tight, protective shell to shield the child from the impending fire, waiting for the agony to begin. Time seemed to freeze as the silver Zippo lighter slipped from Adana's manicured fingers. It hit the gasoline-soaked concrete with a sharp clink. Instantly, a hungry, roaring ring of bright orange fire erupted around Adela and Mia. The intense heat sucked the oxygen from the air, painting the damp walls of the warehouse in a hellish, dancing glow. Adela took a few steps back, safely outside the circle of flames. But her twisted mind wasn't satisfied just watching them burn. The fire was spreading too slowly for her psychotic impatience. She wanted to hear the maid suffer. "You're not dying fast enough," Adela hissed, her eyes wide and unhinged. She walked over to a pile of debris and picked up a rusted, heavy iron pipe. She approached the edge of the flames. Adela was entirely curled over Mia, creating a human shield, her body tense and trembling. "Let's give Lucas a real tragedy to cry over," Adela sneered, raising the iron pipe high above her head, aiming straight for the terrified 5-year-old girl. "Say hi to your dead mother for me, you little freak." As the heavy metal swung down with deadly force, Adela didn't cower. With a fierce, primal scream, she thrust her body upward, intercepting the blow. Crack! The sickening sound of iron shattering bone echoed over the roaring fire. The pipe slammed into Adela's back with enough force to shatter her spine. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs in a violent gasp. Blood violently sprayed from her lips, splattering against the dusty floor. But her arms never let go of Mia. She collapsed back over the child, burying Mia's face in her chest, desperately covering the little girl's ears to block out the monster's laughter. Through the blinding pain, as darkness edged into her vision, Adela began to hum. It was weak, broken, and wet with her own blood. But she hummed the lullaby. "You are safe. I am here." She hummed to drown out the terror, proving that a mother's love, even from a woman who didn't give birth to the child, was stronger than fear, stronger than fire, and stronger than death itself. Adela, enraged by this quiet defiance, raised the pipe for a second, fatal strike. "Die!" she screamed. But the blow never landed. Boom! The massive, corrugated steel doors of the warehouse were literally blown off their hinges. 2 armored, matte black SUVs smashed through the smoke and debris, their high beams piercing the darkness like the eyes of predatory beasts. Tires screeched violently on the concrete. Before the vehicles even came to a complete stop, a dozen tactical operatives in full SWAT gear swarmed the building. Red laser sights cutting through the smoke, locking directly onto Adela's chest and forehead. The iron pipe slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the floor. From the lead vehicle stepped Vance. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like the Grim Reaper in a bespoke suit. The aura of terrifying, murderous rage radiating from him dropped the temperature in the room despite the raging fire. He stalked forward, his eyes fixed on the bloody, burning scene. Adela's survival instinct kicked in. She immediately dropped to her knees, forcing crocodile tears into her eyes. "Lucas, oh, thank God you're here," she cried out hysterically, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the dying girl in the flames. "She kidnapped Mia. I tracked her here to stop her, but she set the fire. I tried to save them." Lucas didn't stop walking. He didn't blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pressing a single button. The audio echoed through the warehouse speakers of his SUV, crystal clear. "I paid $500,000 to cut the brakes on her mother's car. The fact that this brat survived was a glitch. I am simply fixing the glitch." Adela's face drained of all color, turning a sickening, chalky white. Her jaw dropped in absolute horror. Lucas stopped 3 feet away from her. "The GPS locket I put on my daughter," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "It doesn't just track location, Adela, it records." "No, Lucas, please, let me explain." Adela shrieked, crawling toward him, her glamorous facade completely shattered. Lucas didn't even look at her. He gestured to the tactical team commander. "Arrest her. Ensure she stays in solitary confinement until trial. I will spend every billion I have to make sure she rots in a cage for the rest of her miserable life. Get this filth out of my sight." The operatives hauled the screaming, thrashing socialite away, dragging her through the dirt like the trash she was. But Lucas's focus was already gone. He turned to the ring of fire. He didn't wait for the fire extinguishers. Vance, a man whose suits cost more than most people made in a decade, walked straight through the roaring wall of flames. Sparks burned his clothes and seared his skin, but he didn't flinch. He dropped to his knees inside the inferno, the heat blistering his face. "Adela," he choked out, his voice finally breaking. He carefully lifted her broken, bleeding body into his arms. Mia clung to her, completely unharmed, but crying silently. Adela's eyes fluttered open. Her vision was fading, her breathing shallow. She looked up at Lucas. Her hand, trembling and covered in dirt, reached up to touch his soot-stained cheek. She didn't complain about the excruciating pain in her spine. She only looked down at the little girl. "Mia is safe," she whispered, a faint, angelic smile touching her bloody lips. "I kept her safe for you." And with those final, selfless words, Adela's hand slipped from his face. Her body went completely limp in his arms, her eyes closing as she slipped into the dark abyss. "No, no. Adela, open your eyes. Don't leave me." Lucas screamed, an agonizing roar of a man having his heart ripped out from his chest for the second time. He pulled her against him, cradling both her and his daughter tightly. He stood up, a god emerging from the flames, carrying his entire world out of the burning warehouse. Outside, the wail of ambulance sirens pierced the night, flashing red and blue lights washing over the tragic scene. The villain was defeated, but as Lucas watched the paramedics fight to restart Adela's stopping heart, he knew the real battle, the battle to save the woman he loved, was only just beginning. The ICU of New York Central Hospital smelled of sterile antiseptic and the cold, mechanical monotony of heart monitors. For 72 hours, Vance had not left the chair beside Adela's bed. The billionaire titan, a man who could command armies of lawyers and move global markets with a single signature, looked haggard and broken. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his jaw covered in a thick stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't care about his empire. He only cared about the rhythmic, fragile beep that proved the woman he loved was still fighting. The lead surgeon had been grim. "The damage to her spine was severe, Mr. Vance. The iron pipe nearly crushed her vertebrae. We've stabilized her. But whether she wakes up or walks again, it's in the hands of fate now." Fate. Lucas hated that word. He grabbed Adela's pale, limp hand, pressing it against his forehead. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You promised Mia you would keep her safe. You kept your promise. Now stay to see the world we're going to build for you. Stay and let me love you for the rest of my life." On the fourth morning, the heavy glass door of the ICU creaked open. Mia walked in, holding a small bouquet of crushed wildflowers she had picked from the hospital garden. The little girl looked smaller than ever in the vast, sterile room. She approached the bed, her wide eyes fixed on Adela's bandaged face. Lucas watched his daughter, his heart aching with a fresh wave of grief. Mia hadn't spoken since the fire. She had retreated back into her silent world, a shell of the child Adela had worked so hard to heal. Mia climbed onto the edge of the bed, her small hand reaching out to touch Adela's cheek. She stayed there for a long time, just breathing with her. Suddenly, the silence was shattered, not by the machines, but by a sound Lucas thought he would never hear again. "Mommy." Mia's voice was tiny, hesitant, but crystal clear. She leaned down, burying her face in Adela's shoulder. "Mommy, please wake up. Mia is scared. Mommy, please come back." The word "mommy" ripped through the air like a thunderbolt. Lucas froze, tears streaming down his face as he watched the miracle unfold. And then, the second miracle happened. The heart monitor's rhythm spiked. Adela's eyelids began to flutter, struggling against the weight of the darkness. A soft, agonizingly beautiful groan escaped her lips. Her fingers could move, instinctively curling around Mia's tiny hand. Adela slowly opened her eyes, her vision blurry and filled with tears. She looked at the little girl crying on her chest, and then up at the broken billionaire kneeling beside her. I'm here, Mia," Adela whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. She looked at Lucas, her gaze filled with an unconditional love that had survived fire and betrayal. "I heard her. She called me Mommy." Lucas grabbed both their hands, sobbing openly, his forehead resting against Adela's hand. The cold, ruthless billionaire was gone. In his place was a man who had finally found his soul. "She did, Adela. She knows who you are. We both know. You're the heart of this family. Please, never leave us again." The recovery was long, filled with intense physical therapy and days of painful struggle. But Adela wasn't alone. Every step she took, Lucas was there, his strong arms supporting her, his voice whispering encouragement. And every night, Mia was there, her voice becoming stronger, her laughter filling the halls of the mansion once more. The visual healing was complete. The Vance estate no longer looked like a tomb. It was a sanctuary of light, flowers, and joy. Adela had not only healed Mia, she had healed the very soul of the man who owned the world. 6 months later, the Vance estate was transformed for the wedding of the decade. Thousands of white hydrangeas and pale pink peonies lined a golden aisle that stretched across the manicured lawns toward a floral altar overlooking the ocean. The guest list included the most powerful people on the planet, but the focus was entirely on the bride. Adela walked down the aisle, her spine straight and strong, her white lace gown flowing behind her like a cloud. She wasn't the poor orphan anymore. She was a queen entering her kingdom. Mia was the flower girl, running ahead and throwing petals with reckless joy, her voice ringing out in clear, happy laughter. When Adela reached Lucas, he didn't wait for the priest to tell him to kiss her. He took her hands, looking into her eyes with a reverence that made the wealthy guests go silent. "Adela, you found my wallet, but in truth, you found my life," he said, his voice echoing across the cliffs. "Today, I don't give you my money or my name. I give you my heart, my life, and every breath I take. You are my home." As they kissed under the golden afternoon sun, a roar of applause erupted. High above them, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. Far away, in a maximum security prison cell, Adana would spend her life in darkness and silence, haunted by the recordings of her own crimes. But here, in the light, the story of the billionaire and the orphan ended not with a transaction, but with a transformation. They weren't just a rich man and his maid. They were a family, forged in fire and healed by a love that would last for eternity. The billionaire's heart was no longer a fortress. It was wide open, finally at peace.
What an incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and justice. If you were in Adela's shoes, would you have returned the billionaire's wallet knowing the struggles you faced? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Billionaire Love Stories, US for more dramatic and heartwarming tales. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. See you next time.